All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone, to all of my Facebook family and friends. How are you today? It is here in Cleveland, at least, a nice, sunny, finally warm day outside. So I hope everyone is doing well, still staying home, staying safe, and practicing safety measures and protocols. As I know, we have a lot going on right now. So as always, as you tune in with me, let me know that you've tuned in. Give me a hello or something. Let me know who's tuned in with me today. Hey, Mom. My mom is a big supporter. She's always the first one to tune in. Thanks, Mom. Hey, Auntie, I see you out there too. Thank you for joining in. I'm trying to make sure that I get everybody to a few moments to kind of join in a little bit. Today is interesting topic that we're going to have because, we just kind of changed the platform a little bit because we do have to be agile and be in tune with what's going on. So I'm excited to have my guest today with me today, Michael Lyles. I have no qualms of saying that he is someone to me that has been very instrumental when I lived in the DC area to help me form and shape and engage my level of engagement into politics. And so I very informally tag him as my political mentor. So I'm happy to have him with us here today as we talk about all things politics. And so we're going to have those conversations, which we know sometimes, especially in some communities and cultures and families, we don't talk about politics, but it's a time like now where we have to. So, hey, Elise, how are you? Thank you for joining. So with that, just as a brief recap, I know I've been doing these information sessions for a while. As you know, I'm #AskTiffanyH. Many of you know me as not only a realtor in this area, but also a financial advisor. And as things had began to change with COVID, felt the need to come out and provide information, tools, resources to help others. And then that morphed into other things. And as time continued to change, so does the topic and information need to. And so, hey, Tiana, how are you? Thank you for joining. And so the last time we talked and we came out, we talked about using your social capital. We know that there's a ton of small business, micro enterprise businesses that are out here. We call them the mom and pop stores, or entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, who are pretty much being left behind and left out of these stimulus dollars or these loans or these PP, opportunities that are kind of under the radar and not going to be able to benefit from that. And so we want to make sure that we can come out and how can we as a community be the change that we need? How can we be the resources to help people in our community instead of expecting for other people to do things or the government to do things for us? So interesting enough, we came up with #SmallBizChallenge, and we want everyone to get out, and we still do, to pick a small business, someone that you know, and it takes nothing to just post them and highlight them on your social media. Just say, hey, here's this company, here's what they do, my barber, my dry cleaner, my beautician, just be out here to promote and help someone. Hey, Yo-Yo, how are you? Just a little plug in right there. And so that was that, but not knowing that times like now would have came about. So I reached out and was having a conversation with you, Mike, and I'll allow you an opportunity to introduce yourself, but just to kind of create the framework a little bit about today. Just reached out to you to talk about all this going on, this politics and whatever. This was maybe about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks ago, we were thinking about this and like, oh my gosh, look what has happened in 2 weeks until now. And so how relevant the conversations we were having then, or even talking previously about social capital, that we're here at this point now. And so with that being said, if you would do us all a favor to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background before we then open up the doors today, or open up the topic today as we talk about politics.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you, Tiffany. You have exceeded my thoughts about the things that you would do in your area in Cleveland, and really appreciate you inviting me here today. You've always been a stalwart supporter of what's right in the community, and we appreciate you expanding in this way to let other people get the knowledge that you have. My particular experience, I'm a lawyer by trade and training, currently in the city attorney for the city of Annapolis, Maryland, which is the state capital here in Maryland. Prior to that, I was executive director for about 8 years of the Human Relations Commission, which is the civil rights governmental agency in Prince George's County, Maryland. Prince George's County is a local county that borders the District of Columbia. Prior to that, after that, I was in private practice, business law, civil litigation, human rights, civil rights. I've also worked for the Department of Defense, so I have a lot of experience with DOD as a trial lawyer. Have worked in other government capacities, in foster care and that kind of thing, but mostly a private practitioner in civil litigation, business law. But over the years, I've been called upon to run for office. Was a city council person in Bowie, Maryland from 2004 to 2007, and one of the first African Americans to sit on that city council. And most recently ran for state's attorney unsuccessfully here in Prince George's County, because I thought I could bring a different brand of leadership to that office, and to fighting for the rights of people, but also to protect the community in a way with the law enforcement position. So that's pretty much me.
Well, I put myself on mute so that there wouldn't be much background noise there. I forgot to unmute myself there. So thank you for sharing that with me and with us. And hey, Courtney, how are you? Hey, Magda, thank you for joining as well. Thank you so much. And when we had this conversation a few weeks ago, we were just the topic, or the thing that was on my spirit that I was just burning me, is this notion that Joe Biden, this commentary where the media was speaking really out of context,
right,
of what he said.
Right.
Media's tagline was, "You're not Black if you don't vote for me." Right. That's not what he said. And more so what he said is, if you don't know the difference between Trump and me, then you're not Black, which is a completely different statement and connotation altogether. And just really from it. And so I was like, I need to talk to somebody who's really politically, and we talked and bounced some ideas. And I was like, hey, let's have this conversation online, and so that's how that started. And then since then, we have had the unfortunate situation with George Floyd, and now the rioting and all of this other kind of stuff, still amid COVID, and so there's a lot of moving pieces with that. So with this point, I would like to start off and ask you or share when your response back to me when we had this conversation about this new false lexicon that Democrats don't care about us, or that they take us for granted.
Well, my response,
a little bit for me.
Okay, so my response basically is, because I don't support the current president and his policies and his initiatives, that I don't care if Joe Biden called my mama out of her name. I'm voting for him, and I'm gonna be happy about it. So, he's gonna get one term out of me, but he's definitely gonna get one, and hopefully that will start next January when he's elected in November of 2020. So that's
right.
kind of my position, that we rush around looking for ways to not do right. In my view, we sometimes we think too much with our heart and forget to just fall in line and do what's right by our people. And sometimes we can let slights, even intentional slights of words of our friends, dissuade us from adopting and wrapping our arms around people who traditionally have been our people and our supporters and our friends. And we have to be very, very careful about ways in which people come in to separate us from our allies, right?
Right.
Got to be careful about that.
Right, right. And that's a good point when you say we have to be careful about separating us from our allies. You know, we had this conversation and we spoke about like, hey, it's kind of like a family. Sometimes you are there and, you know, you might fall out with your sister or your cousin, you know, about a topic. But when you go out in public, be like, hey, that's family.
Right.
And you still going to support your family. Now, you might pull them to the side and be like, you were out of order and that was wrong or this, that, and the other.
That's right.
That's still family. And it's kind of one of those connotations that we can, you know, it is in comparison to who our current administration is. And if we think about and if we think that that has been beneficial and that has been good for us, there's a problem there. Now, what happens is, okay, once we get Joe in office, now we can step back and have this conversation like, okay, let me help you out because that was out of order. The same that you would do with that family member. So like, you're right, that was really great to kind of understand and sometimes just put it all in perspective a little bit. So
yeah, we don't like everything our family members might say, but they're still family members and you better not touch them or deal with them. I will deal with them. And that's the way we need to have an approach to our allies going forward.
Exactly. Hey, Danny, thanks for joining us. Hey, Orlando, thank you so much. Demetria, thanks for coming on as well. Ray and Andrew, I see you out there. So please, as we're going through, if you have any questions, please type your questions. I know sometimes the questions can be long or whatever, but, you know, just help us out and put your questions in there that you might have for us. And so leading a little bit to that point is like historically, we have gotten, I think, and I'm not going to put this all just on millennials. We've gotten to a point where I think we have not really understand the system of politics. You know, we know for those of us who really engage, and I think maybe the sentiment. So let me give some credence to people who feel like they take us for granted. So, right. I think the history had been, well, majority of people who are involved in politics, we call retail politicians, which means you live, you breathe, and you die a Democrat. You live, you breathe, and you die a Republican. You're that because your parents was that, because your grandparents was that, etc. And majority of history has presented itself that that was the case. Now we're coming to a time where people are beginning to sit on the sideline a little bit and say, well, I want to process thought about it. And just because that's what my parents did or what my grandparents did does not mean that that's the same for me. And so this thought process comes out about, well, what have they done for me? Or what do they do for me? And you know what my response on that is going to be, but I'm going to let you have the floor first.
Well, we got to be real careful about saying that a particular party is not doing right by me. Black people in the United States vote at between 14 and 25%. That means out of 4 people you know, only 1 is voting in every election. And so we've got to get over ourselves that somebody else controls our destiny when we have abdicated the responsibility for controlling our own destiny by voting, by running for office. We can't sit on the sidelines and then blame someone else for not attending to our needs. We haven't even picked up the cup to go get the water from somebody who's trying to give it to us. So we've got to do a better job of assessing where we are politically. I would say that I've never felt that someone wasn't attending to my needs, and I've been more politically active. But I think that political activism is why I felt that I didn't want to leave it to someone else to serve my needs and to produce the results I need to produce. I want to produce them for myself and in league with other people who think like me.
That's right. Hey, Cliff, thanks for joining us. Hey, Cheryl. Hey, Aaron, thank you for joining. You're right. And so I've always had this connotation that, you know, this country, the lexicon of this country has been more about not what our country can do for us, but what can we do for our country? It's more of a proactive engagement versus a reactive engagement. And it's pretty much like that across the board anywhere. We can have a conversation about, do you go to college and get a college degree? It's not what the college degree can do for you. It's what you can do once you have the college degree.
That's right.
It's a little bit of this ideology today that we're always about, this woe is me mentality versus this proactive, and it's my responsibility to go out, engage, and get whatever it is there's for me to get and for me to have, you know.
I think too that some of the terminology of the Democratic Party taking you for granted comes from the people who don't want us to ally ourselves with the Democratic Party. So if I'm the enemy of the Democratic Party, I'm going to do everything I can to separate the largest voting bloc in the country from the Democratic Party, right? Come on over to my party. I'm going to do better for you than they're doing. Of course, that's what that party is going to say. And we've got to be very careful, again, about cleaving ourselves away from those who have been our allies. We may not agree with them all day, every time, but we probably have a better opportunity in a party that has seen fit to be more inclusive.
Right. So, hey, Jeff, how are you? Thanks for coming on board with me. Hey, Kevin. Hey, Trisha. Thanks for joining as well. And so you're right. So it's interesting because when we look at the data, the lowest percentage of African-American voting turnout happened in history in 2016. History, right? Now, history highest, of course, when we were voting for our first Black president, which was Barack, right?
Historically, yeah.
After that, sometimes the conversation isn't about come on over to us because we can be a better party, but distract us so much that we don't come out and participate at all. And that's a bigger burden and fear I see than necessarily thinking about going over to the other party.
Well, and I think too that I listened to the president who runs currently Color for Change, and he made a very important statement about 2.5 billion members on Facebook. Facebook has taken us for granted, but we're still on Facebook every day. Facebook hasn't hired a Black engineer, a Black coder to do anything. But yeah, we on Facebook every day. So when it comes to taking people for granted, we need to look at all the different groups and organizations and companies and corporations that take us for granted, have never signed any treaty with Black people to do anything for us. And so we need to be careful about spreading that type of philosophy around all the organizations that we say we're a part of or we love or we want to be associated with, because we do have some people who have never committed to our agenda at all. But yet we love them so much, we can't do without Facebook right now. We can't do without Twitter and Instagram, and they can't find a Black engineer. That's what they tell you. There are no Black engineers, so we don't hire them. Really?
Right. And not only that, the algorithm that's created does not include the demographic nor psychographic of African Americans either. Right? How we engage, the things that we find of value, how we interact, that algorithm is not reflective of who we are or what we do. And so it's across the board, absolutely. So
and Facebook allowed the Russians to come in and put false propaganda on their website and refused to even inspect whether or not it was real. And so we were going around in 2016 thinking all these crazy things were happening, and they really weren't. We've got real enough problems to deal with than to be, kind of hoodwinked by propaganda from, other countries, right?
Absolutely. And so with that a little bit, what do you feel like at this point, what are the things that tools or tips that you would give to persons who are not trying to be elected officials? They're not really, quote, political, but tools to re-engage in civic engagement?
Well, I think part of the approach should be to join with other organizations that maybe you have an affinity for. And everyone is going to have a political agenda, and you may be able to affect the political agenda broadly by getting with your business group, your woman's group, your fraternal groups, and finding a way to impact the thoughts and the political agendas of those who are in office. You'd be surprised that most of us are probably going to churches and other large organizations where we as a group can have a political impact without necessarily running for office. So find a group, help to craft the agenda of that group so that it meets your needs and the needs of the people in your community. And then go out and advocate and elect people who will serve your needs, and don't let them get into office and then forget about you. That's priority number one.
Right. And so that's a good point, because we have this situation where, to me, I say it's and not or. Like, people will say, oh, people out here protesting and they're doing all of this, voting doesn't count or isn't significant. It's and. You can protest and vote. It's not one or the other. You know,
and part of what has to happen in voting is that we need to understand that there are a whole raft of people running for elections that have more of an impact on our daily life than president and vice president. You know, there's a county sheriff, there's a county solicitor, a district attorney, someone who collects your taxes, a comptroller. These are the offices that affect you more so every day, that we should be interested in learning about and either running for office or supporting others who care about the things that we care about.
Exactly. And so, case in point, we had this conversation, and here's connecting the bridge about why you should vote. And as being an attorney, maybe you can share a little bit more in depth to this process for us. So we know our previous president put in via executive order some guidelines on how police departments should go about reducing the amount of aggressive interaction with African Americans. And we know that when it comes to whether or not finding these police officers guilty or, you know, letting them off has a byproduct of the grand jury and those judges or the DAs that are prosecuting, and there's this essence. But those people are, as you said, some of them are elected and or appointed by people who are elected. And a lot of those people are not Democrats. And so we're having a lot of this challenge right now because we don't realize that, excuse me, our voting, that local ticket, like you were saying, has a direct impact on whether or not the consequences are going to be incurred by these police officers for these things that are happening. And so, being an attorney, can you share with us a little bit of the technicalness about those positions? And that's who we need to be understanding, knowing, learning about as well when we're voting.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about the Gregory Floyd issue. The Gregory Floyd issue, the president of the United States can't do anything about, right? He couldn't affect the discipline of that officer at the presidential level. Who could is the chief of police, and the chief of police in Minneapolis is appointed, as with many cities and states, appointed by the head of that city, the mayor, and probably ratified by their city council. The district attorney may be an elected position, and the district attorney is the one who dropped the ball on prosecutions, right? And in Minneapolis, I think that's an elected position, and as in most states and cities, and so counties. Additionally, when you think about what rules govern police interaction, you've got to go to the state laws to determine whether or not there are protections in state law for law enforcement. In Maryland, we have a Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which is a same kind of protections that are given in 15 other states, right, to people who wear a police badge, meaning that you can't discipline them the way you think is appropriate. It's going to be according to the law. It's going to be part of a union contract, and sometimes they can't be dismissed without certain kinds of findings and certain kinds of investigations. And even then, they may be allowed to retire, get a check, and go to another department. So, but your local government, your state government, county governments really control most of, if not all of, local policing.
Right. Thank you. And that's the perfect example of showing how, when we say this, that politics is local. It is more about your local elected officials have more of a direct impact on your life than the president, right? But it is cyclical because I don't want people to think that, oh, I'm gonna just vote for my local ones and not vote for my president, because we've seen a situation where we had a president in office. He had a hard time getting legislation approved because we have a House and a Senate who was not at that time majority Democrat. And so they blocked everything that happened. And so it's an up and down effect. So your congressperson, your Senate person, you need to get out and vote those, but also your local mayor and your local state's attorneys. And, as you just mentioned, because they do have a direct impact on the quality of your day-to-day life, what happens.
That's right. And your delegates, your state delegates and senators have an impact on how many people from a party that you like get elected to the federal Congress, right?
Right.
Because they draw the boundary lines for voting. They establish the voting precincts and how many people are in those and what the makeup and demographics of those people. All that starts with your state senators and your state Congress people. So it's important to vote all up and down the line.
Absolutely. And then it also adds a little bit of layer of this thing that we have now all become aware of the Electoral College. So it's that Electoral College that has been increased in some areas and diminished in other areas because of the redrawing that you just spoke of. That's happening by people who've been elected. So we have, in state of Ohio, we have more Republicans. Sometimes, so speak to this a little bit. This is a great question. I lived in DC area. I lived in Prince George's County, which is predominantly African-American, one of the largest counties in the United States of high income African-Americans, right? In a concentrated area.
Right.
So sometimes you can get a little diluted as to what goes on in the rest of the world because majority of the people look just like you.
Yeah.
Hey, come back home to Cleveland. I'm in Cuyahoga County, which we are predominantly Democrat, but not predominantly African-American or whatever. And so sometimes we think that because of that concentration of where we live is predominantly Democrat, that there's no impact in other areas. But when we look at the other counties around, say in Ohio, in the state of Ohio, it's predominantly Republican. So therefore, again, they're rewriting the maps and they're diluting the power of in here in Cuyahoga County and whatever. And so again, understanding the system of politics has that impact as well.
Yeah, it is a system, and the system is controlled by the majority in the House or Senate of any state. And how you get people elected at the state and federal level is by votes within certain districts or precincts. Those lines are drawn by the people you elect at the state level for your state house. They draw the line. So if Cuyahoga County, for instance, is a circle and it's 75% Democrat, the Republicans could come in, and this happens all over the country. They'll cut up Cuyahoga County so that part of the population is voting northeast, and part of the population is voting southwest, and part of the population is voting northwest. And so now it's not a contiguous group of Democrats in Cuyahoga County. It's now Cuyahoga County. Those folks are voting in several different areas where they are now a minority.
That's
in
right.
a largely Republican district. So then Cuyahoga County never elects an official that represents the majority of the folks that live in that geographic area.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So we got one question here. And again, everyone that has tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in. Bev, I see you. Trish, Faye, thank you very much. Lily, thanks for joining us. We have a question here on the screen. Hey, Samia, thanks for joining. Auntie Deborah, thanks for joining. Any suggestions on how to effectively reach those individuals that are not utilizing their platform to vote and or get involved when they respond with negative comments?
Yeah, it's one of those things that should be part of what people who are active and who are knowledgeable and educated on these issues do, and that is to always take someone to the polls, convince them of the rightness of being involved, even if they're not running for office. It's a constant kind of discussion you should have. As a matter of fact, it's probably a better discussion than discussing with some people whether or not racism exists. And there are a lot of people out there. Let me go and educate some people over here about racism existing. We know it exists. You're going to waste your breath. Take the time to deal with the people who you know and love who probably aren't voting. Start there and spread that out, as well as use the platform of organizations that some of our non-voting brothers and sisters are part of with you. You go into a room of people, you go into a church, 75% of the people aren't voting because that's the voting rate. 75% of the people in your church are not voting. So start there. Talk to those people. Use the message of the Bible and God if you must, and how, in order to love ourselves, we have to treat ourselves with respect. And voting and taking a active part in our community is the highest form of love in a political context.
So you kind of so thank you for that. If there's any questions or whatever that are out there, please post your questions. We definitely want to just have this conversation. So you touched on a sticky topic.
I'm sure.
Because that's what we do, right? And we talk about the church that we go to, and we sure majority of the people there aren't registered to vote or what have you. But when we think about historically, and we talk about what politics is, and I've said this all the time, is that politics is about civic engagement. It's not what they can do for us. It's about what we can do, how we involved in our community. We used to have neighborhood watch, and it takes a village to raise the kids. It was our neighborhood who looked out for us, and we've shied away from that, the essence of that. As well as we've shied away from understanding that we have to get out and we participate. And so when we look historically, our civic engagement has been birthed, cultivated, and in the past was facilitated via the church.
Right.
And so long story short, that's not the case today. Right? We don't have that. And so, not to get into that sticky topic, but considering that it's not necessarily facilitated in that arena, what else can we do? What else is our role to do civic engagement being?
Well, I understand. I go back to my original point that we're all part of other organizations that may be important in our lives, and we should use those organizations, the number of people that come to those organizations with us, the platforms that those organizations create to do the kind of civic engagement you're talking about, right? And so we shouldn't just think that the church is the only place to do that, but there are many other organizations. You're in real estate and construction, and there are construction associations, there are real estate associations, and you can be a part of those and take your philosophy and your activism to those organizations. And I know the realtors, I know them very well here in this area, and they're always politically active. They're politically active because they know that if they can change the rules, if they can keep commerce flowing, they will sell houses. And they want to make sure that is open and free for everybody. They also want to make sure that people have what they need to live in the house once they bought it. And so that's another opportunity for folks to be engaged. But we all have organizations like that we can be engaged in.
Right. And so you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but here's a question. It says, please share the importance of voting for the House and the Senate. Folks continue to say Obama didn't do anything for Blacks, not realizing the effect Mitch McConnell and those before him held issues that affected us were pushed under the desk. So those topics that was there, understanding that the president needs to also have a supportive Congress and Senate, or basically Congress, House and Senate, to be able to help push his agenda along.
Yeah, well, in brief, as we discussed, we really have to vote for Congress people and senators at our state level because they draw the boundaries for electoral areas, right? So the electoral areas are the ones that control who gets elected governor, who might get elected senator or congressperson going forward, and also who might get elected to Congress at the federal level, as well as designing the area that comprises the electoral college in your state, right? The Electoral College is an amalgam of votes coming from the various districts within a particular state. And how those are arrayed are based on the votes that you have for a senator and delegate in your state. So it's very, very important that you keep those folks in line with your political thoughts and that they get elected.
Okay. Here's a good question. It says, can you share or please remind us why the importance of completing the census as it relates to politics as well?
Yes, it's a great question. The census, even before we get to the redrawing of boundaries, the census is the document that the state officials go to determine the population. Most of these states and at the federal level, there is a certain number of people that make up a voting district, right? And every state has to have about 10,000 or 100,000 or 500,000 in order to make up a district. What they do is they rely on the census from the previous time it was taken to determine where those numbers are and then draw a circle around the number of people that they need to get voted into office, right? Secondly, the census is important because it establishes at the federal level where money is going to various localities, states, municipalities. For instance, if the census tells Congress that human trafficking is a problem in Dallas, Texas, then when the grant funds come from Dallas to fight human trafficking, they know they can see that there's a human trafficking problem there. And so, yes, we've got to send money there. We know that the young people in a particular area are increasing in number based on the census. And thus, the municipality, the state needs money from the federal government to help it build schools and roads that get to those schools and help with grant funds to pay for teachers in everything from speech pathology to, discipline or English. And so those federal funds get apportioned based on the amount of people in a particular district.
Right, right. So here's a topic that we talked about a little bit, and just going back to where we are right now, everyone is a little heated. We have a lot of the protests that are going on. Speak a little bit about, from a political standpoint, and having been an elected official, what does the protest, like, how do politicians look at the protest? How does that weigh on their inference as it relates to their position from a legislative standpoint?
Well, it's not so much the protest as it is who shows up at the protest that politicians look at. And I've been in my fair share of both political seats and protests. And I will tell you, if you consider that in a particular district, say here where I live, if 75% of the people do not vote, and that same 75% of that group demographically is out in the street, I don't care whether you protest or not, you ain't voting. So it don't matter. You protest all day long. At the end of the day, if I'm an elected official, I'm making a decision based on the people who call me every day, who come and stand out at the poll and pass out my material, who I see going into the voting place, right? If I don't see those people protesting, then I don't care about them. I don't care about the protest. If Tiffany Hollinger was at the protest, now I'm starting to pay attention because I know Tiffany votes in every election, all up and down. So it's really the not just the quality of the protest, it's the makeup of the protesters. We know that young people are voting in higher numbers. So I think it will make an impact this time around that more young people are out there and protesting. I think it will make a difference. The demographic makeup makes a difference of the protesters in various areas. But we got to be careful of saying that a protest leads to change. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay. So, hey, Jennifer. Hey, Dina. Thanks for joining in. So you make up a good point, right? And you say it's not just the number of people who are there. It's about who's showing up. It's about the voices that are being heard. I will say I was shocked to see international protesting right now with the events with George Floyd, right? I was shocked that in other countries that they were protesting, and so from that standpoint, where maybe in some cities this might not have been as many people, from a legislative viewpoint, does that weigh on listening a little bit more tunely, because you're seeing that the impact is more international than maybe necessarily local in your area?
Well, I think at the federal level, federal elected officials pay attention to that. To some degree, we have to deal with other countries to do everything from set up a military base to providing us trade and products and services. And so it does have an impact, as well as we do have a role in certain international organizations like the World Health Organization, International Monetary Fund, United Nations, the G7, the G8, and NATO. These organizations, our position in the world matters. And
Right.
if our position is being undercut by federal officials at the presidential level who don't care about people's rights, then we come in kind of hobbled, and we're looked at with a lack of seriousness because we are we don't care about the rights that we think other countries should have for their people.
Right, right. So, hey George, hey Michael, thanks for joining us. Hey Deshella, thanks for coming in. So right now, we just have to say this. People are like, oh, well, it's this looting, and so I just want to play devil's advocate a little bit, right? When we look back in history, we know and we have seen that people's attention collectively, politicians or whoever, community's attention they focus in when it's so heated, and the rioting is at a point where it's not peaceful protest. That is, we seen the change that did happen when Rodney King came. We seen the change that someone gave me the information that when they assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King, they protested for 6 whole days after that. We seen the impact that has happened when communities get so fed up and the tension just boils over, that it's no longer peaceful protest, but the rioting happens. And so just playing devil's advocate a little bit there, it will lead one to say, but if I look back in history, that's the only time I get somebody's attention. If I look back in history, no disrespect, where did we learn it from? If we want to talk, what I'm saying? So
yeah. Well, I have 3 things to say about that. I heard an African proverb that says a neglected child will burn its own house down in order to just feel warmth and love, right? Secondly, Langston Hughes in his poem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred? Does it sag like a heavy load, or does it explode? And then thirdly, no one seems to have this overarching need to describe and discuss violent protests when Black people are doing it. But at the hockey game, when the hockey team wins, when the baseball team wins, when the college football team wins, and the kids that don't look like us are marching down the street, burning everything in sight, somehow that's revelry and mayhem and tomfoolery and shenanigans, and not criminal thugs taking over the world. No National Guard are being brought out to stop the fans of Notre Dame from burning down the community around that college. So I understand what's going on when those comments come up, and there's really not much more to say about it than that.
Touche. And so finally, as we want to kind of wrap up, because I know we have a few more moments. Again, if you have any questions out here, please drop your questions really quick. We would love to hear from people out there, or your thoughts, your questions or your thoughts. Hey, Charmaine, thank you for joining us as well. Hey, Tiffany Hooks and Meredith, thank you for joining. As we wrap up, again, I am always a believer of, we have a responsibility to not talk about it, but we need to go out here and do something. It's what's next. It's now what? Because I've shared with people, I'm just not going to comment at all about the writing. Like I'm gonna be silent, like they were silent when Colin, was kneeling, and I'm gonna just be silent when George was, the knee was on the George Floyd, and I'm gonna just be silent because, I am of the mindset that is cause and effect. If these causes didn't happen here, we don't have these effects here. So I'm a just, like you, just leave it there at that. But I'm also a believer of, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to stay here and pontificate. I get engaged in politics. And like you said, I don't have a problem getting my needs met. I know who my local mayor is. All of my businesses are in one municipality. Shout out to Mayor Blackwell in Maple Heights. I can call her whenever I need something, and she's very responsive to what my particular needs are. When I lived in Prince George's County, I didn't have a problem. I knew who the county executive was. I didn't have a problem because I engaged in the process, So I'm not saying everybody got the time. I'm not saying everybody got to be political or whatever, but it's now what? Before we answer this question right quick, here's another question I want really quick. Okay. How can our Latin community or other people of color support in solidarity?
I think that's a great question. And I would say that make sure that the Latinx community organizes itself around issues that they care about. And two, find a way to link up your agendas with other organizations from other people of color potentially, but even whites as well, who have organizations that are sensitive to needs, that things that you need in your community. It's linking agendas. There's a way for us to work together on things that have mutual resolve or mutual results that produce good communities. And we can work on those. I would say, think about from an agenda standpoint, how can police departments hire more Latinx individuals, more African Americans, more women? How can we increase the education level of police who are hired in communities? How can we break up the old boy network from some of these departments? And everybody in each of their communities can help to do those kinds of things, and tell your brothers and sisters to get out and vote and to link up and try to figure out who is best to serve us generally, people of goodwill and people who care.
Okay. Good question. And so as we get ready to wrap up, as I have shared with you before, I don't shy away from, and I'm not going to. And so as we say, get out and vote, I am saying get out and vote blue, up and down the ticket. Every Democrat needs to have your vote, your voice. I am not hiding away from it. I'm not saying like whatever. At this particular point in time, I need everyone out here to understand that what we have currently in our administration is not effective, not only for me, for majority of the country that is out here. We have diminished our stance as it relates an international view. We have got to get to a place of re-establishing some sense of normalcy and civility in this country. And the only way we are going to do that is to get the current president out of office, as well as getting him some bench strength. And we only can get him some bench strength if we also have our House and our Senate predominantly Democrat as well as all of our local judges, mayors, Ohio representatives as well. I'm not leaving them out.
Dog catcher, whoever it is.
Right. So I said it, I stand behind it. One of the beautiful things is that, I always speak my piece and my truth about what happened, and we have to get out here and vote. And so I thank everyone for joining us and coming out here. And before we leave out, are there any final words that you would like to leave us with as it relates to what's next?
Wow. I think what's next is very important, and is important to understand what can truly make change. And I would say that firing a particular officer probably won't get the change that we want. We're probably talking about moving forward with understanding what the structure of police department and policing is. For instance, many police departments do not require and probably can't legally require police officers to live in the communities that they police. I would bet you that the communities where the police officers live in those communities, they have less shootings of unarmed people. They probably have less arrests because the police officers know the people in the community. So that we can start there as something that needs to change. Additionally, we probably need to find a way to increase the level of knowledge of those who go into policing in other kinds of disciplines like mental health and social work, right? If you are coming off of the battlefield and you're looking for a job and you go to the police department, you're going to take the battlefield into the police department. And so that's why our police departments are so right now military focused, because many of the people who are in our law enforcement have had military backgrounds. And I have a military background, so I'm not saying that that's a problem. I'm just saying that the military background should not be the only place where we draw from to recruit folks who are in our police departments. So those are two things I think we should fight for in our individual communities.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And so to everyone that's out here, as always, I appreciate you. If you would like to get in touch with Mike Lyles as just questions or whatever, how can people reach you on social?
Well, man, I'm on Facebook, but I don't check it as much. So you can reach out to me on Facebook, D Michael Lyles. Make sure you put the D and the period, and you can find me. I'm on Instagram, Mike Lyles, and Lyles0597, something like that on Instagram. You probably find me. But you
can just reach out to me. I'll make sure I get you in touch with
email Tiffany, and she will make sure that she will give you my cell phone, my home phone, my email, whatever is necessary, so you can reach out to me, and I'd be happy to help anybody who's interested in these kinds of things.
Thank you. And as always, if you have any questions or want to reach out to me, you can find me and go over. Please follow me on Instagram at ask_Tiffany H. You can find me on Twitter at ask_Tiffany H. And of course, you can always find me on Facebook at Tiffany L. Hollinger. Email me at asktiffanyh@gmail.com as well. So again, I thank you so very much for coming out with me today. Again, I just remember just saying, hey, I just needed to vent, right? I called you up and said I needed to vent. I needed to put it into perspective. I needed to understand because I needed to formulate my thoughts before I just went rampage out here. And then all of these things, manifest. And so I always say that when you're doing what you're called to do, it all lines up appropriately. And so I thank you for your time. I thank you for engaging and providing your wisdom with us. I will have you again. Everyone who's listening, join me next Wednesday as I will have another conversation about politics as well. So stay tuned. Everyone have a blessed, wonderful day. And remember, it is up to us to be the change that we are looking for. Have a great day, everyone.